Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Sorastro's Oathsworn painting series. In this episode, I'll be painting the Ranger from Oathsworn Into the Deepwood by Shadowborn Games. As usual, I've taken inspiration from the wonderful character art when choosing my colours for the figure, and I'm going to be using some quick and easy methods to get the main colours down, followed with some optional highlights and finishing touches. I first prepared the miniature as described in the previous episode, by gluing the parts together, including my chosen bow from the armoury, priming the figure in black, and providing some grey and white zenithal highlights from above. Let's begin. Because this is quite a textured and organic figure, I've chosen to use some speed paints to establish the main tones. So I'm going to begin with an overall coat of Plaguebearer Flesh, then introduce some Militarum Green to deepen the shadows for the skin, and the darker Creed Camo for the growth-like armour. So this is the Plaguebearer Flesh, which I'm using to tint the entire figure. And here I'm blending some Militarum Green into the hair to create some variation. We can also colour the base with this. And here I'm just soaking up some of the excess paint. Once dry, I'm now going in with some additional Militarum Green to further shade some of the areas of skin. And I'm now using the Creed Camo to darken down the armour. Next, I've chosen to introduce some Magos Purple into the shadow tones of the skin to add some further variation. And I've decided to push the depth of the armour tone using a mix of Dark Angel's Green and Terradon Turquoise, which I've thinned with some Gryph-Charger Grey. And I'm also making sure that there's no white left on the base. For the bow, I'm using a roughly equal mix of Skeleton Horde and Basilicanum Grey. On a whim, I also applied this to the quiver to separate it from the rest of the outfit. And I chose to apply a second layer of this to the bow to achieve a little more depth. Finally, I'm going to use some regular paints to add some more solid tones to the base. I'm starting with some burnt umber, which can be applied thinly enough to allow some greenish highlights to show through. And I'm now sketching in some more prominent highlights with the light moss green and lime green. At this point, I've chosen to apply some ultra matte varnish to dull the waxy finish of the contrast colours, which you could leave until the end if you like. Once dry, we've already achieved a pretty decent tabletop standard. Let's now add some optional highlights and finishing touches. I'm first going to add some fine black lining to help with the definition. and I'm now adding some highlights to the armour, starting with Pastel Green, then with the addition of some Vanilla White. For some of these areas of fabric, I mixed in some light moss green to achieve a slightly darker highlight tone. And for some brighter glints, I'm mixing in some Vanilla White. Next, I'd like to approximate some of the nice glowing effects we can see on the bow in the character art, even though it's not actually sculpted onto the model. So I'm first placing a few dots of pure white where I want the glowing elements to be, and these can be fairly irregular. I'm also turning this into a glowing shard. We want these to be as white as possible. I'm now creating a very dark brown with some burnt umber and black, and using this to draw around the glowing elements to create the impression of a recess. I'm then mixing in some Vanilla White to build up some lighter tones for the surrounding area, helping to create a sense of relief. You can see that I'm gradually getting lighter. We can also add some general highlights to the rest of the bow. I'm then brushing some neon orange over the glowing elements, and you could use whatever bright or fluorescent orange tone you like for this. It's okay if we hit some of the surrounding area whilst we do this. I felt my first pass was a little light, so I'm now going in with a slightly more opaque layer. And to create a brighter centre for each element, we can dot in a little white. Then provide one final thinned layer of the orange. I'd also like to create some glowing eyes, so here I'm once again drawing them in with some pure white. And to give them some extra definition, I'm also carefully adding some dark lining. And I'm now brushing over some thinned turquoise blue. Finally, I've decided to add some additional scenic elements to the base using some resin grass tufts and mushrooms from Epic Basing. Ideally, this could also be done before priming. As it is, I'm now simply brushing some black primer on, then adding some colour. I'm just using a range of green and earth tones from the Scalecolor artist line here, along with some reds and oranges for the fungi. I'm also using a mix of lime green and vanilla white to provide a few small highlights to the skin, mainly for the face and hands. And this completes the Ranger. Thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you've enjoyed the video. As usual, you can find full product lists in the video description, as well as links to all of my social media accounts and Spotify. My very special thanks go to my kind patrons for funding this work. If you'd like to help support what I do, feel free to hit the Patreon link to find out more. Join me again soon as we continue painting miniatures from Oathsworn into the Deepwood. Happy painting!